All right, so to demonstrate how an array might work, I created this BugCollector program problem. And the idea here is that we have a program in which somebody is a bug collector. And what he'd like to do is enter in a series of days worth of bug collection. So in other words, he might come up to the program and today he's got 5 days of bug collecting that he wants to enter. And so we want to be able to take day 1, he collected 5 bugs. Day 2, he collected 3 bugs. And then we're going to put all of those, each day's worth of collection, into an array. And so that way we have the benefit of tracking each day's worth of collecting. And then we're going to also accumulate the total so that we'll have a total amount of bugs that he collected. And then we're going to average out the total that he collected for each day. So that's the job ahead of us. So I've gone ahead and started creating some variables and got some output started, or some input started, just so we don't have to fat finger through. But I'll explain what I've got going on here. So first of all, I have some variables that I've got started, and I have a number of days, and that's going to keep track of, I'm going to allow the user to put in, and you can see that there's a C in here. I'm going to ask the user, how many days of collecting are you entering? Like in my example just now, they might want to enter 5 days worth of collections, or maybe 3 days, or 25 days, whatever the case may be. So I'm going to get that value from them. And what that will provide me is the ability to then, just like you saw in that last video, I'm going to create my array based on how many number of days they're going to give me. So my array then will keep track of each day's worth of bug collecting. And since I'm going to get that number from the user, I could hard code in 5 here or something. I certainly don't know the bugs that were collected ahead of time. I'm going to get that data as the program runs. And so I'm going to use number of days, so that way the user can dictate how many elements are going to end up being in my array. All right, I've also got this variable called total bugs, tote bugs, and we use this word accumulator. And what that means is that's going to accumulate our total of all of the bugs. So if we said that in English, on day 1, I collected 5 bugs. So my total bugs collected so far is 5. On day 2, I collected 10 bugs. So I add 10 and 5. So my total bugs is 15. But we're still keeping track of day 1 is 5 and day 2 is 10. So that's kind of what's going on here. And then I'm going to use this variable, today's bugs. That's what I'm going to use to get the value from the user. So I'm going to ask the user, how many bugs did you collect today? And ultimately, that total day's bugs is going to be put into my array and accumulated with the total bugs. So we'll put that into practice here. Let me see if I can put this all on the same line so it's not so confusing. All right, so that's what I've set up ahead of time, just to sort of make things a little bit easier for me to type in things. All right, again, I'm going to just do some copying and pasting so that I spend more time explaining and demonstrating rather than typing. So I'm going to create this for loop. And the idea behind the for loop is that I want to loop through, I'm going to create an iteration based on how many days they asked to input. So remember, we asked them, how many days will you be collecting? We caught that number in this variable, and I'm going to use that number as my limiter, my number of days, so I know how many times I'm going to loop through my for loop and therefore get data. 5 days worth of data, 6 days, whatever they input, that's how many times I'm going to loop through this array. And that's how many elements I allocated in my array, how many spaces I allocated to collect the day's worth of bug collecting. All right, so now I've got my loop set up, and I'm going to do a little bit of copying and pasting here again. So let's see, I'm going to copy and paste these 2 lines in here. All right, so I'm going to output this just so we can see it working. Okay, so in my for loop then I have set up, I'm trying to get everything lined up nicely. All right, so in my for loop, I'm going to ask, how many bugs did you collect on day, and then I'm putting in the I. So I'm keeping track, I'm not doing anything with it yet. I'm just going to run this because I want you to see what's happening here with the I. So I'm going to run the code, and let's see what we get. How many days will you be collecting? I'm going to say 3 and hit the enter key. So now we've gone into the for loop, and we've stopped here on this line, right? And I is 0. So we got asked, how many days do you collect? How many bugs did you collect on day 0? Because I is 0. So, and then it's waiting for CIN so it can keep track. It can get from the user. Let's say we collected 15 bugs on this day, and then 25 on day 1, which is really day 2, and 50 on day 3. Okay. So, all right. So what I want to bring to your attention, first of all, is because we're using it to keep track of our array elements, right? 0, 1, 2, 3. But it doesn't make sense on my output. Like, I'd rather this say day 1, day 2, day 3. So what I'm going to do, just to make that more visually appealing, is I'm going to say I plus 1. So similar to that expression we did on our last video, I'm not actually changing the value of 1. I'm simply saying whatever is in 1, display that, or whatever is in I, display that with one more number next to it. So add 1 to that number, but that doesn't change. I'm not assigning a new value to I. I'm just having a different output. So let's see what I mean by that. So now what we should see is, I'm going to collect 3 days again. Now you can see I is in fact 0, but I'm getting displayed 1. It's just more appealing to the user. So let me just play this out. Ooh, I didn't mean to do that. 503, 51. This person was really anxious to collect bugs on these days. Okay, so I'm just using the I plus 1 just to give a different visual, but recognize it's not changing the value of I. It's still 0, 1, 2, 3. All right, so now we're getting the number from our users. So the next thing I'm going to do is copy in some more code so you don't have to see me typing. So the next thing I'm going to do is these 2 lines of code. Let me separate it just for visual. So now that we're getting in this value from our user, now I know how many bugs they collected. I'm going to, this is my array. I created an array up here of bugs collected, right? And we set it to however many days they input. So that's how many elements are in this array. So bugs collected of I, whatever I is on this iteration, assign it to whatever they entered for day's bugs. So in other words, in my example here, bugs collected of 0 is going to receive 503. Bugs collected of 1 is going to receive the value of 51. And bugs collected of 2 is going to receive 96. So that's going to put our values into our arrays. So we're filling our array with each individual bug collection per day. So that way we don't lose track of each day's collection, which might be handy. We might want to know how, have an output of all the different days as well as our totals. And so here you can see our accumulator at play. So remember, we set up this variable right here that I said is going to be our accumulator, and it's going to keep accumulating how many bugs are collected in total. So there's my variable. This is that shortcut, which is the same thing as saying, if I were to just type out total equals, let me do it this way so you can see it, total bugs plus today's bugs. So total bugs. Whatever was in total bugs, take that value, add whatever the user input today or in this iteration, and take that result and assign it, overwrite what was in total bugs with our new calculation. And so it's accumulating. So the shortcut to this statement is plus equals, which is doing the same thing. It's just a shortcut. I don't have to write out total bugs plus again. So plus equals is doing the same thing. And now total bugs is accumulating all of our total collections, whereas our bugs collected is keeping track of each individual bug that was collected per day, bugs collected per day. All right, so that's getting the values from the user. So now that we have the values and they're sitting in our array, we can't really see it, so we're going to, again, use a for loop to output and to show those bugs. So let's demonstrate and see what was put into our array. So I'm going to, again, copy and paste. Try to line these up accordingly. All right, so let's see what we have going on here. All right, so let's loop through the array and see the values for each day, or the bugs collected. Let's do it that way, bugs collected for each day. All right, so let's talk about that. Again, I'm looping through the for loop, and I'm using the number of days as how to determine how many times I loop through this for loop. We're going to see out some string, hard-coded string. Again, I did I plus 1 so that my days make sense. So instead of day 0, I'm just saying, oh, display day 0 plus 1, so that way it looks readable. Now day 1, day 2, day 3 makes sense. I have a colon here just to separate the two. Probably put a space here. And then we're going to output whatever was in bugs collected and whatever iteration we were in. So bugs collected of 0, 1, and 2, etc. So now we should be able to output the things that we input. So let's run that and see if that in fact works. So we're going to start again. And this time I'm going to make it easy on myself. I'm going to say we're only going to do 2. And so recognize how flexible we are by using num days as our determination of how many elements are we going to store, as well as how many times are we going to loop through this for loop. So I'm going to use 2, and it's okay, so we should get question 2 times. How many bugs did you collect on day 1? Let's say 25. And how many did you collect on day 2? I'm going to say 97. We were very busy that day. And so now we're back into the second loop, and the second loop is looping through our array that we filled on the first for loop, and it's outputting day 1, 25, and day 2, 97. So that's coming from this piece right here, right? I hard-coded the day, and then I took whatever I was, 0 plus 1, and that's what's showing up here instead of the I, which is just 0. Then the semicolon and a space, and then bugs collected of 0. So the first element that was put in was 25. That's what's being output. And then the second element would have been 1 plus 1 is 2. So we're seeing day 2. Bugs collected of 1 would have been 97, which is what we filled right here. All right, so we're almost done. And so the last piece of our problem, let's see how far we've got. Create a problem where bug collector can enter in the amount of bugs collected daily. We did that. Your output will be the total bugs collected and the average collected per day. Okay, so I also output each individual day, but now we have to output the total bugs. Well, we've been accumulating that, right? So we're going to output that and the average collected per day. All right, so let's do that. Again, I'm going to just do some copying and pasting. So I'm going to put that after the for loop, and let's see what we've got here. So my output then is total bugs collected, and we saw our accumulator. You can see that up here, right? So we were accumulating those total bugs. That makes sense. And the average is really easy because we already know the number of days. We're using that variable again because we just took whatever the user input. So we've used this variable in many ways, but it also shows you how flexible a variable can be. Because if the user wants to do this 10 times or 5 times or 3 times, it doesn't matter. Everything is just going to work, right? Our average is going to work because the total bugs is being divided by how many days they entered, they put in. Our for loops are working because we are basing it on the number of days that they input. Our array is working because we allocated enough places in memory for the number of days that they needed. So everything should just be working. So now let's output this and see how we do. So we're going to probably do 3 this time. How many bugs did you collect on day 1? Let's do 50. Day 2, we weren't so busy. We did 5. Day 3, we did, 45. And so now we see the output, 55 and 45. Total bugs collected was 100. And then it did the average collected. So that is, by the way, why I did doubles. I'll kind of reiterate that. If we do this as ints, so let's see. Okay, so we'll go ahead and try that. So if I do these as ints, let's see. What are our numbers? Int number of days, double total bugs. If I do this as, let's do it as an integer. And then we'll do total bugs as an integer. So let's run that and see what happens. I might have some, well, let's see what happens. So now I'm going to try these as integers. So I'm going to do 5. Oh, I didn't mean to do 5 days, but all right, 60, 45, 70, 22, 5, and so on. So now what you're seeing is, in fact, let's do a calculator. Calculator app. See if I'm applying a calculator here. There we go. And so if I do the math problem, 60, oh, we already know, 228. That's our total, right? So 228 divided by 5 equals 45.6. So if my data types are ints, it's not going to round up or round down. It simply truncates because the math problem involved ints. So since that was my most limiting factor, it just truncated it and turned everything into an int. So maybe that's what you want. Maybe it's not. I'm just bringing it to your attention. So 45.6 is not rounding up or rounding down. It's simply cut off the 6 because it said, well, your most limiting data type here is an integer. You must have needed an integer, so I'm going to give you back an integer. So if we want to keep that decimal because you need to be more accurate, then you're going to want to change this back to double. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to make something easier on myself. So if I have 2 days and I have 50 and I have 49, so I'm still getting a integer because one of the variables in my data type is an integer. Limiting factor is still an integer. So now if I make these both doubles, let's run that again, and we'll try something simple. We'll do 2 days, 40 and 87, and now you're getting that decimal point. So food for thought. But anyway, overall then, what we've accomplished here is hopefully we've demonstrated that here is a reason why you would not want to necessarily decide ahead of time, or you might not know ahead of time what the values are of an array. And so we didn't know, we knew we wanted to create an array because the array is going to hold each day's worth of collecting. We wanted to maintain each day's values. So we're able to do that with our array. We use this variable num of days to allow our user to determine how many days of collecting we were going to store data for. We use that variable not only to declare our array with the amount of spaces, the amount of spaces in memory, the number of elements per day, how many days we needed to store. We also use that to loop through our array because we knew we were going to store a certain amount of days worth of data, so that's how much our for loop is now also looping through. And then we used it down here again, and then we used that number of days to determine what our average was. So that gave us the ability to kind of create data on the fly, right? We didn't know it ahead of time, so we had to allocate it, and then we filled it in our for loop. Our user actually filled it for us with numbers in our for loop. So that would be my demonstration of the use of arrays.